Welcome to Real Leaders with Roshini, the podcast with real talk, real questions, real insight, and we hope real inspiration. For real. We're here at Capitol Grill in downtown Minneapolis. My guest today is Libby Larsen, Grammy Award-winning composer of classical music, many other award-winning. She's been composing for more than 50 years, has more than 500 compositions and 70 commercial recordings in her name, more than 70 in fact. Libby, you are a force. That's just the word that comes to mind. All of this, all for composition and music.
That's true. That's very true. Yes, I've had music in my soul and my breath and my brain since I can remember even being conscious in the world.
So do you think you were really born to do this?
I think I was, yeah. I know I was actually. Now, looking back after all these years, which does not seem like 50 years, it seems like a year maybe.
Because there's such joy for you?
There's such joy. There's also what I like to call full use of the brain. You know, all the aspects of the brain are that I know about anyway, you know, are firing all the time when I am thinking in music, because I think in music. I don't think in words.
Let's talk about that because, you know, people are familiar with various names. You hear composers. I've heard some of your work. It's amazing. But you start with nothing and then you have written for so many different instruments. I mean, how does that even birth? How does that start?
That is a very good question. And one that I've thought about, but also lived for all these years. It starts with what I call, when I'm giving a talk at a university, I call it a point of botheration. You know, something's bothering my brain, you know, and it's not what I'm going to cook for dinner, you know, or what color to paint the room next summer. It's unnamed, and it's an energy, and it's there. It's it's probably the ground zero of how thought begins. You know, when you know you've got a thought and you want to think the thought, but you have no idea what the thought is. We all experience that. But for me, that is the point where music begins. Because it is true, I think in music, which got me into trouble a lot when I was a little kid. A lot.
Because no one else is thinking in music.
No, there are people who think in music, but there aren't very many of us.
Right. It's not like you were in a kindergarten class of all people who think in music.
No. In fact, I have no idea who of my classmates were thinking in music, but I think there probably are a few of them. It's just that in our culture, we have very meager systems for understanding how little children think if they're not thinking sequentially and verbally in ways that we think, as a culture, in ways that we think are healthy and growthful and will give them a good future. So I got into trouble a lot when I was little because I percussed on my desk. I tapped on windows. I hummed. I whistled. I still do all these things. It's just now I'm an adult, so I can.
No one's going to make you be in trouble for that.
No. Because I work for myself. I did get in trouble when when I was in college working at stockbroker firms. I'd come down the hall whistling and not even realize it, and would be given some advice that's probably not the way a corporate intern should behave. But anyway, so my answers to all of the concepts that the teachers were presenting, such as CAT in first grade, would come out for me,
Wow.
not cat.
I love that.
And so I learned that I needed to respond verbally, and so I spent a lot of time in the class thinking about a concept that was on the table, whatever it was, and then blurting. I was a blurter. I would blurt out a word. which was not what was called for.
Right. I can see how teachers might not be into that.
No, not into it at all. And now that that even happened my last day of my last class of my PhD. I blurted. And my professor, who I knew very well, just kind of gave me this look like, seriously? You're still blurting? But by that time, I knew myself well enough to know that that impulse to make a sound in response to a concept was what made me a composer. That if I blurted on a trumpet, that was fine, as long as the trumpet player could play it, Or if I hummed on a violin, that became a melody. Or if I percussed, tapped on my desk, just put it on a wood block.
It's fascinating.
Isn't it interesting?
It's so interesting. But then there's still some organization you have to do because you're tapping, you're blurting, you're percussing, you're doing these different things. But you have to get it together so others can deliver that music or that composition.
Yes, and that is where the hard work comes in. I learned that I had many avenues for organizing my, let's just call it blurting. I could write songs, I could make a piece for piano, and I did all those things. But my mind is a composer's mind. There's a really fine distinction here that writing songs is composing. Writing piano music is composing. But writing for a symphony orchestra or creating an opera is a different endeavor. I don't want to say level because I don't want to gradate, a song versus a symphony. But if you're a woodworker and you do beautiful work and you build perhaps a gorgeous chest of drawers, that's a brilliant art form. If you're a woodworker and you're going to build a Tibetan temple, that's a different endeavor.
Yes, it is.
Same materials, different endeavor. And so for me, my brain is a big systems thinking brain. I think I come by it genetically, in my family. So if I think sound, I think symphony. And I hear the whole thing in my head.
Wow. It's busy in there.
It's busy in there all the time. I found many outlets to quiet down my brain. But it is busy in there. So the hard work of turning the tapping into a woodblock or the humming into a melody is really architecture. It is to composing at the way that I compose is really I'm an architect of sound in time and space. So I use the colors, the instruments to create a big structure of sound in time and space, which is like an architect who's building, a bank building, a multi-story building, a complex. That's an architecture. It's really fascinating and very satisfying and almost impossible to describe.
Right, but you have it in your head. You have the blueprint.
I do.
The big, very in-depth, very dynamic blueprint.
Yep, I do. Mm-hmm. And my brain just does that. If there's a problem or a challenge, or if the needs of the many, need to be considered in order to affect a system that accommodates all those needs. My brain, for some reason, just goes right to the end. It doesn't say step 1, step 2. It goes like, there it is, and then I have to work backwards to figure out what steps need to happen in order to involve many, many people who are necessary in order to create the thing that we're creating.
Is this a solitary life, or do other people play into your composing time, your creation time?
It's a combination of serious solitude and then serious collaboration. That a piece of music like a string quartet or an opera or somebody has to construct the building, but then everybody else has to come into the building and inhabit it. The constructing of the building is pretty solitary. It's pretty solitary. I need a lot of solitude, not uninterrupted solitude. I just need the spirit of solitude so that I can make this object that no one can see or feel or taste or smell.
Right, you have to truly hear it, see it, be able to put it on paper so others can interpret, others can use it.
Yes, I do. And that means solitude and relative silence. Then, though, once it's on paper, and even when it's not even all on paper, in fact, I'm right in the middle of a process right now where the performers are saying, "Can I see the music?" And they need to see the music really soon, or they won't be able to enter the building and make the piece.
Wow.
The piece needs to be out of my head and onto paper with enough time so that everybody else who is entering into this process of making a piece of music can do their best. So it's a balancing act of solitude and collaboration.
That is amazing. Wow. So this is deep work. What do you do to refresh, to unwind, so that your head and everything going on in there doesn't get the best of you?
That's
or deplete you.
Really. It's depleting because it's always there. I've always had it there, but it gets depleted. I do odd things, not odd for the people I do them with. For instance, I'm a long distance runner, and absolutely adore that sport, of just getting out there and running for miles and miles and miles, no matter how I feel that day, just so that my body can be in tune with itself.
And sometimes that's solitary, sometimes it's with others.
Yes, that's true. I also love to go to hardware stores.
Really?
All my life I've loved to go to hardware stores, yes. And I like to talk to hardware people. There's problem solvers, many of them. I love to look at nuts and bolts, the racks and walls of various sizes of nuts and bolts. At any place I travel a lot. You can find me usually, if there's a good hardware store, I'm there.
Do you have a collection of nuts and bolts?
Nope. I
just like to look.
I like to look and fit them together and and then unfit them together and then try different solutions. It's like a giant puzzle room.
Would you say that's one of the more quirky things about you?
Yeah, you could say that.
I don't even want to use that word, but I am kind of stunned. I would never have imagined that.
Hardware stores. I know. Hardware stores. Yeah, I think there actually is a subculture of hardware store people.
Who knew?
It's not something we talk about a lot. You don't see T-shirts with, love your hardware.
Or you could, and that could be a conversation, Libby. The things that we learn on Real Leaders with Roshini podcast. I love it. When you bring real leaders into the conversation, these are the lessons you learn. Now, you were born on the East Coast, but you grew up in Minnesota. How do both those different parts of the United States affect your work?
Profoundly, actually. I was born in Wilmington, Delaware, but moved to Minneapolis when I was 4 years old. However, my parents, who are both from the Twin Cities, never stopped talking about living on the East Coast. So I had this vision of East Coastness, knowing that and feeling that, it's different from where I live now. I live here by choice. I've had many opportunities to move from Minneapolis, but I live by choice because I really, really am bound to the land, the water, the horizon, the sky, things that we have on the edge of the Great Plains that you're hard put to find in other parts of the country. However, once I focused in on composing music for classical instruments and in studying to learn how to do that as deeply as possible. Then the East Coast comes into play in a big way. It has to do with how orchestras and orchestra instruments and all those, how they spread across the country from the East Coast to the West Coast. That was a long time ago, but they set a pattern for a kind of, I don't want to call it prejudice, but it's a mindset that if it's good, it must be from the East Coast in my line of work. And several of the music conservatories, such as Peabody, Juilliard, Curtis, they're all on the East Coast. And so there's this mindset that the East Coast looms, and then anybody who lives west of the Hudson, couldn't possibly.
Who cares about them over there?
Right, exactly. Which is okay. That's fine. Whatever it is. But it's made me actually. I mean this free, because I live here. And I think I can go anywhere I want, think anything I want. People don't even, in my business, they think I live in New York.
Which is fabulous. So you can just go about your business here.
Yeah, I just go about my business, and it's a really unfettered way to live with the muse of creativity. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. Well, depends on what shape the world is in.
Yes, exactly.
But this is a wonderful place to be a creative artist, and there are so many creative artists who live here.
Yeah, the Twin Cities definitely known for that.
Absolutely,
the whole state of Minnesota, really,
and people who move here so that they can be unfettered in their creativity. It's quite an extraordinary place. I think of it as the Northland. People will say, "Oh, you're from the Midwest," and I think, well, no, it's really not quite the Midwest. It's the Northland.
I would totally agree with you.
Really?
How has becoming a grandmother changed who you are? Has it?
Well, I'm only 6 months into it, so I don't know until I have a few more years under my belt. I feel calmer. I'm not sure why, but I feel calmer. Here's a really wonderful thing. When you can feel your love grow, there are opportunities in life to actually invest love. When you meet your life partner, when you reinvest in your partnership, when you invest, when a child arrives on the scene, whether it's your child, or your grandchild, or a niece or a nephew, you can feel your love grow exponentially.
I agree. I have a nephew who was born in March of 2019, and every time I just want to eat him up. He's so adorable.
Totally get that.
You see love.
You see love, and you feel love, and you see it, and it's not like I'm like remembering what love was like. It's like I'm discovering yet another whole dimension, of love and the great gift of being able to love. That's how I've changed.
That's amazing. One of, I think, the best fun facts about you, and this has been really influential in your life, is you're a devotee of Mr. Spock. You never missed a Star Trek episode during college.
Yes.
And in times of confusion, your mantra is WWSS. What would Spock say?
Yes, it's true.
And why Spock?
I've been thinking about that since I wrote you that note. Okay, here's a fun fact. He wasn't human. He was a Vulcan. He admittedly operated from a place of pure logic, but he was also challenged by that fact.
And he knew it.
And it puzzled him. Whenever there was an emotional kerfuffle, which
such a great word.
Yeah, every episode there was an emotional kerfuffle. Spock had a way of raising his eyebrow. You knew he was thinking, fascinating. You knew he was observing. And then he would say a Spockism, that fit the situation, and was generally, at least to me, felt extraordinarily universal. Like, see if I can get this right, like the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the needs of the one. And I can't tell you how many times in my life when I've become emotionally responsive to something that I can't control. Control's an issue with me. I am a composer, so I get to control everything on the page. But, when there is a situation I can't control, and there are many in our lives, and a lot of them in the last 2 years, where I try to think, what would Spock say? And I go to the needs of the many. And from there, I try to understand what is going on. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the needs of the one. The environment, for instance. It's very clear to me the needs of the many are outweighing the needs of the few, and especially the needs of the one. And so I think Spock would say that, and then we would see what's going on in this particular environmental situation, that in fact it's backwards. Where the needs of the one, working with the needs of the few, have decided that they outweigh the needs of the many. And
that doesn't work for you or Spock.
Nope, neither of us. It wouldn't. So Spock would say, fascinating, Captain. And then Kirk would probably have some sort of emotional response, usually a macho one.
Right. I can see it.
Yes, yeah. And eventually they would figure something out, but that's fantasy. No, we live in fantasy and reality. But Spock is really kind of my guardian angel.
Let me ask you this, WWSS, what would Spock say about Libby Larsen?
He might. I don't know, because he would approach it from logic. And there's nothing particularly logical about a 5-year-old girl growing up in a Catholic school in Minneapolis, Minnesota, becoming an adult being who has composed 500 works, among them 18 operas. There's no particular logic that I can see that would say that 5-year-old becomes this mature artist. I bet you Spock would have a surprisingly logical observation.
He might say, she's very human.
Yes.
Libby Larsen, what a pleasure to chat with you today. Thank you for being with me.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep it real.